Several years ago, back when the monarchy was all over the news with royal weddings and jubilees, a YouTuber called CGP Grey made a video he called The True Cost of the Royal Family Explained. It's fair to say Mr. Grey got a few things wrong. Well, everything wrong really. Republic has pointed this out a few times, but to no avail. Mr. Grey is an American who, according to Wikipedia, lives in London. He runs a very popular and entertaining YouTube channel which has more than 4 million subscribers, so it's unfortunate that this video is so completely wrong because it will influence the debate. Since he put the video up, it has done the rounds many times, coming up in social media time and again as some kind of evidence that the monarchy costs us poor Brits absolutely nothing. Well, here's a quick correction for CGP Grey and anyone else who thinks the monarchy is funded from the royal family's own hereditary fortunes.
Look at that. What a waste. That queen living it off the...
After a brief introduction, the video jumps right into making its first mistake.
£40 million. That's about 65 pence per person per year of tax money going to the royal family. Sure, it's still 23 pence short of a complete shield, but it might be more than you want to pay.
This is plain wrong. This is spin from the royal household's own press team. No public spending is ever justified or explained away by dividing it by every man, woman and child in the country, or even by every taxpayer in the country. That's not how tax and public spending works. When MPs got into trouble over their expenses 10 years ago, they wouldn't have gotten away with saying, "What's the matter, it's just £1 each." The question is, in fact, how much of the spending can be justified, and what else could it be spent on? And of course, the monarchy costs a lot more than £40 million a year. Republic's research shows the annual cost is in excess of £345 million.
After all, those are your coins. Why does the Queen get to steal them? Well, it's a little complicated. The story starts with this guy, King George III.
Grey then gets into the history of the civil list, but makes the common mistake of thinking the exchange between the King and Parliament was a personal one.
Back to the reason the royals get tax money. King George was having trouble paying his bills and he had racked up debt. While he did own huge tracts of land, the profit from their rental was too small to cover his expenses. He offered Parliament a deal. For the rest of his life, he would surrender the profits from the rents on his land in exchange for getting a fixed annual salary and having his debts removed. Parliament took him up on the deal, guessing that the profits from the rent would pay off long term.
When Grey mentions the King's expenses, he forgets to explain that those were not personal expenses, but the cost of running the British state. The revenue from Crown lands was used to pay for the judiciary, civil service and the day-to-day running of government. As Britain's constitution evolved and responsibility for government shifted to Parliament, it was inevitable that the revenue from Crown lands would be sent to Parliament instead of the King. To ensure the King could continue to pay for his own costs, Parliament agreed to an annual payment called the Civil List.
Just how well did Parliament do from this? Back to the present day, let's compare the profits and losses by using a tenner to represent £10 million. The cost to maintain the royal family today is £40 million per year, but the revenue paid to the UK from the royal lands is £200 million per year. 200 million in revenue, subtract 40 million in salary costs equals £160 million in profit. That's right, the United Kingdom earns £160 million in profit every year from the royal family.
And here's the big problem with this video. This statement is simply nonsense. The Crown estate is not the private property of the royal family. It belongs to the state. It will continue to belong to the state should the monarchy be abolished. Remember, in the UK we have a principle called the Crown in Parliament, which means the Crown is in the hands of Parliament and Parliament decides what happens to the Crown's property and assets. The Crown estate also doesn't pay anything towards the cost of the monarchy.
Doing the math for an individual, £160 million divided by 62 million people is about £2.60. Because of the royal family, your taxes are actually £2.60 cheaper each year than they would otherwise be.
Well, no, because taxes don't work like that, do they? The royal family isn't giving us a penny, and taxes are set by the government and have nothing to do with how much comes into the treasury from the Crown estate.
But perhaps that's not enough for you because you're a real greedy geezer. Why not kick the royals out and keep 100% of the revenue? Because it's still their land. King George the Crazy wasn't crazy enough to give up everything, just the profits. But it wasn't only him. Every monarch since King George III has voluntarily turned over the profits from their land to the United Kingdom.
This is simply wrong. The King never did personally own that land. It was and is the property of the Crown. This isn't some obscure point where no one is quite sure who owns what. It is as clear as day. The royals did not and do not own crown land. The clue is in the name. It belongs to the crown. That same crown, you will remember, which is in the possession of Parliament. And that personal surrender at the start of each reign is a formality, a tradition that has no real legal force because the monarch has no choice in the matter. This has been accepted for well over a century. A document written by civil servant G. Percival in 1901, the year Queen Victoria died and Edward VII became king, made this point very clearly. Percival quotes two leading authorities from Victoria's time, the first saying that the surrender is irrevocable, another saying a custom as strong as law now requires that at the beginning of each fresh reign the sovereign shall, not by an act of bounty or generosity, but by an act of justice, restore to the nation the land which the nation lost so long ago. Percival adds that it by no means follows, as has been argued, that he, the king, could have taken the revenues, now worth some millions a year, freed and discharged from all obligations other than for the support of the royal household and dignity. The contention that the revenues are, when unsurrendered, simply for the expenses of the royal household and for private enjoyment has no historical foundation. In other words, these experts of their day, at a time of greater deference to the monarchy, make it very clear that the surrender of the estates cannot be reversed, and that it has never been the case that the revenue from crown land was there for the personal use of the monarch and his family. And monarchists who think Charles can take back the crown estate at the start of his reign conveniently ignore the other side of the bargain. In exchange for swapping the revenue for the civil list, the government took full responsibility for funding the civil service, justice system, and day-to-day running of the country. That cost now runs into the billions, but would need to be met by the royal family if the surrender of crown estates were reversed. Charles should probably be careful what he wishes for.
If the government stopped paying the royal family's living and state expenses, the royals would be forced to take back the profits from their land, and your taxes, dear monarchy haters, would go up, not down.
Well, no, clearly not.
Plus, 160 million is just the easily measurable money the United Kingdom makes from the royal family. Don't forget their huge indirect golden goose, tourists. Annoying though they might be to the locals by blocking the tube and refusing to stand on the right, they dump buckets of money on the UK to see the sights, travel ludicrously short distances by public transport, and generally act silly a long way from home. Sure, not everything they come to see is royal, but the most expensive stuff is. And who are the biggest spenders? The Yanks. After they finish buying maple syrup and cheap pharmaceuticals, Tijuana professional services, and illegal pharmaceuticals, where do they go next? The United Kingdom. Americans fly across an ocean to see a land filled with castles that aren't plastic. And why do the Americans think France's castles are so boring and stinky and the UK's castles are so awesome? Because real monarchs still use them.
It's worth saying that Grey has offered no evidence for any of this, and that's no less true than for these bizarre claims about tourism. France, of course, has a much larger tourism industry than the UK, and the UK's tourism industry has nothing to do with the current royals. If you don't believe me, watch The Monarchy is Not Good for Tourism on Republic's YouTube channel.
The Tower of London is so stunning to visitors because the royal crest on the yeoman warder's uniform is real. It's not a lame historical reenactment or a modern LARPing quest, it's the embodiment of the living, breathing queen. Everywhere you look, she sprinkled fairy dust on banal objects to make them magically attractive to tourists, 12 million of whom visit every year, spending £7,000 million, which suddenly makes those direct profits look like rather small change.
It cannot be stressed enough that what Grey has just said is completely untrue. The monarchy has no impact on tourism. None.
But perhaps you don't care that the monarchs are a perpetual gold mine for the United Kingdom. You're a Republican and you dislike the royal family because of their political power. After all, the government derives its right to rule through the crown, not the people. And yes, I'll grant you that back in the head-choppy days of yore, this was a legitimate concern, but the modern queen isn't a dangerous political lion, but a declawed kitten. Her powers are limited to a kabuki theater act of approving what Parliament wants to do anyway. Remove the royal family from government and fundamentally nothing would be different.
So Grey moves on from misunderstanding royal funding and Britain's tourism industry to missing the point entirely about royal power and our constitution. Crown powers are exercised by the government. They make the government one of the most centralised and powerful in the democratic world. The monarchy itself is corrupt, interferes in politics and abuses public money every day of the week. More on all that in other videos on our channel. But the idea that getting rid of the monarchy would make no material difference is simply not credible.
Except now you wouldn't live in a magical United Kingdom, but a rather dull United Republic of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, aka Eswini for short. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
Wrapping up, Grey does what a lot of monarchists do. He insults the country and says we're no good for anything without the royals sprinkling the magic dust around. He doesn't seem to have a high opinion of the country if he thinks we need a rich, corrupt and elite family to make us interesting. Assuming the Union remains in place, what's wrong with the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or just Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
But maybe I'm wrong.
Yes, I'm afraid, Mr. Grey, you are wrong on every point in your video. That's okay, a lot of people get this stuff wrong, and a lot of it is repeated by trusted media outlets as true. But perhaps now you'll think about putting up a more accurate video on the true cost of the monarchy, a real financial cost of more than £345 million a year, and a democratic cost in having a hereditary, unprincipled and secretive monarchy.